Some towns don't just exist on maps. They exist in the deep. Welcome to Ashfern Bay, a forgotten corner of Maine where the ocean isn't just water. It's a presence. My name is Graham Teller, a man drowning in grief, and I came here seeking solace, seeking oblivion. Instead, I found myself in a place that demanded 3 strange rules just to stay alive. What's the creepiest body of water you've ever been near? Tell me in the comments below. And if you're brave enough to face the tide, subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules and ring that bell. Because out here, the sea doesn't just claim the drowned, it sends them back. The watch begins now. The first thing I noticed about Ashfern Bay wasn't the scent of salt, or the cries of gulls, though both were undeniably present, hanging heavy in the air like a damp shroud. It was the silence, a profound, listening silence that seemed to emanate from the dark, brooding pines that crowded the coastline, from the opaque surface of the slate-gray Atlantic, from the very bones of the ancient weathered village itself. It was the kind of silence that felt like it was waiting for a body. My arrival had been less than auspicious. A rattling ancient ferry, the only connection to this forgotten splinter of down east Maine, had deposited me and my meager belongings onto a rickety, seaweed-choked pier. There was no welcoming committee, no bustling harbor, just a handful of grim-faced, oilskin-clad fishermen who had watched my disembarkation with an unnerving, unblinking stillness before turning back to their inscrutable tasks. Cell service had died an hour out from the mainland, leaving me adrift in a world that felt centuries removed from the New York I'd fled. I had come to Ashfern Bay seeking oblivion, or at least a temporary reprieve from the gnawing grief that had become my constant companion since Sylvie drowned. My wife. The word still felt like a phantom limb, an ache where something vital used to be. Her laughter, the scent of her hair, the way she'd hum off key while sketching. All drowned, lost beneath the cold, indifferent waves off Montauk. The official report called it an accidental drowning, a rogue wave during a coastal storm. But the fragmented, alcohol-soaked memories of our last bitter argument on those cliffs, her screams swallowed by the wind, they whispered a more complicated, more damning story. The breach house, as the locals apparently called it, was my inheritance, a dubious gift from a distant, 90-something cousin I'd never met, whose passing had been as quiet and unnoticed as Ashfern Bay itself seemed to be. It was a dilapidated Victorian monstrosity, perched precariously on a spit of land that jutted out into the churning Atlantic, its paint peeling like sunburnt skin, its windows dark and vacant like a skull's eyes. My cousin's lawyer had described it as in need of some attention. That was an understatement of colossal proportions. Still, the thought of burying myself in its restoration, of trading mental anguish for physical labor, had held a desperate appeal. The house smelled perpetually of brine, damp, decaying wood, and something else, something faintly organic and unsettlingly sweet, like overripe fruit left to rot in a dark cellar. Floorboards creaked under my weight like the timbers of an old ship groaning in a heavy swell. The wind, a constant, mournful presence here, sighed through the ill-fitting window frames, sounding like a mournful, disembodied breath. It was, I suppose, a fitting mausoleum for a broken man. My first encounter with a local who offered more than a stony stare came in the form of Clem Harker. He appeared on my doorstep the evening I arrived, a man in his late 50s perhaps, with a ruddy, weathered face, a folksy, ingratiating smile, and eyes that, despite their outward twinkle, held a deep, watery weariness. He introduced himself as the town historian postmaster, and with a self-deprecating chuckle, its undertaker. All vital services in a place like Ashfern, Mr. Teller, he'd said, his voice raspy like dry leaves. We tend to our own, you see. He offered a neighborly welcome, a bottle of surprisingly potent local moonshine. and a stream of unsolicited advice about the treacherous tides and the unpredictable Maine weather. His smile, I noted, never quite seemed to reach those ancient knowing eyes. That night, exhausted by the journey and the oppressive atmosphere of the breach house, I'd fallen into a fitful, whiskey-fueled sleep. I awoke in the pre-dawn gloom to a faint scratching sound. My heart hammered. I fumbled for the bedside lamp, its weak bulb casting long, dancing shadows. Slipped under my door, on a piece of old, water-stained and brittle-feeling paper, was a note. The handwriting was spidery, erratic, yet strangely elegant. Welcome to Ashfern. We know you're new, so here are the rules. Break them, and we all drown. Below this stark pronouncement were 3 numbered directives. Never swim when the lighthouse beam turns red at night. That's not a navigation signal. That's a hunger. If you see people walking into the ocean at midnight, don't call out to them or follow. They aren't people anymore. They're offerings. If the tide recedes more than half a mile, don't marvel at the exposed seabed. Run inland immediately. And don't look back at what emerges from the deep trenches. It comes to collect. It was signed with a single, spidery initial. I stared at the note. The cheap whiskey doing little to numb the sudden, icy dread that gripped me. Rules. For what? Drown. It had to be a prank. Some morbid local humor aimed at the city slicker. But as I read the words again, the beam from the distant skeletal lighthouse that stood sentinel on the farthest point of the bay swept across my salt-ground window, and for a fleeting, impossible second, the stark white light seemed to bleed, to deepen, to flash a visceral, horrifying blood red before returning to its normal, steady sweep. I blinked, shook my head. A trick of the fog, I told myself, or the whiskey. Definitely the whiskey. But the unease lingered, cold and sharp as the North Atlantic wind. The first few days in Ashfern Bay were a blur of damp chill, aching loneliness, and the relentless Herculean task of making the breach house habitable. The rules, scrawled on that unsettling piece of paper, I'd initially dismissed as some kind of bizarre local hazing ritual, but the image of that momentary red flash from the lighthouse, whether real or imagined, had snagged in my mind like a fishhook. My attempts to get basic supplies or information from the mainland were met with a frustrating, almost conspiratorial politeness. The ferry, I was told by Clem Harker, at the tiny dust-choked general store that also served as the post office, ran on a schedule dictated by the tides and the skipper's inclinations. Phone lines were apparently prone to saltwater corrosion. As for internet, Harker had just chuckled. A dry, rustling sound. Everything you truly need, son, Ashfern provides. Always has. There was a finality in his tone that broke no argument. I finally met him on my 3rd day. I had been walking the desolate, shingle-strewn beach that fronted the breach house, the wind tearing at my inadequate city coat. When I saw her, she was standing near the base of the distant black iron lighthouse, a solitary figure silhouetted against the bruised gray sky. Eleanor Rake. She was perhaps in her mid-30s, her face weathered by sun and sea to the texture of old leather, her eyes a startling pale blue, almost glassy, like sea-worn fragments. What struck me most, though, were the scars, a network of thin, pale lines that traversed her throat, disappearing beneath the high collar of her oilskin jacket. She wore long, thick gloves, despite the relative mildness of the day. She didn't offer a greeting, just watched me approach, her gaze unnervingly direct. "You got my note, Mr. Teller?" she stated, her voice a low, soft whisper, barely audible above the crash of the surf. It wasn't a question. "The rules," I said, trying to keep my own voice steady. "Is that some kind of local joke?" A faint, humorless smile touched her lips. "Ashfern Bay doesn't have much of a sense of humor, Mr. Teller. The rules aren't suggestions. They're a compact. The rules aren't suggestions. They're a compact. An agreement with forces older than this town. Her gaze drifted out to the churning, white-capped ocean. That night, sleep was an even more elusive quarry. I found myself by the grimy windows of the breach house, staring out at the black, heaving expanse of the Atlantic. The rhythmic sweep of the lighthouse beam, the only point of reference in the inky darkness. Around 10, I think it happened. The steady white beam faltered. Then, unmistakably this time, it shifted, deepened, and pulsed a vivid, visceral crimson. It wasn't a filter, not a trick of the light. The very quality of the light changed, thickened, casting eerie, blood-like shadows that seemed to writhe and dance on the walls of my room. It felt hot against my skin, even through the glass, an almost radioactive intensity, an irrational, powerful urge, primal and terrifying, rose within me, to strip off my clothes, to run out into the night, to plunge into that dark, crimson-lit surf. My body swayed towards the door. I could almost feel the cold shock of the water. Hear Sylvie's voice whispering my name from the depths. With a gasp, I stumbled back, my heart hammering, the first rule screaming in my mind. That's a hunger. The red light swept on, indifferent, before finally, after what felt like an eternity, fading back to its normal sterile white. I was left shaking, drenched in a cold sweat. A few nights later, again, unable to find solace in sleep, the house groaning around me like a dying beast. I was drawn to the window by a flicker of movement on the periphery. It was close to midnight. The moon was a sliver, veiled by fast-moving clouds. Down on the beach, at the edge of the pale, moon-slicked sand where it met the dark, hungry waves, I saw them. Figures. Maybe half a dozen, perhaps more. Indistinct in the gloom, they were walking silently, purposefully, in a loose procession, from the direction of the village, straight into the crashing, foaming surf. They didn't hesitate, didn't look back. One by one, they were swallowed by the black water. My first instinct was to shout, to run out, to call for help. Who would walk into the sea like that? But Eleanor Rake's hushed, urgent voice echoed in my memory. Her second rule stark and chilling. Don't call out to them or follow. They aren't people anymore. They're offerings. The sight was profoundly dreamlike, yet undeniably real. I watched until the last figure was gone. The only sound, the eternal roar of the Atlantic. The next morning, the sun was a pale, watery disk in a sky, the color of lead. I forced myself to walk into the village, a knot of cold dread in my stomach. Clem Harker was sweeping the porch of the general store, a picture of folksy normalcy. He tipped his worn cap. Morning, Mr. Teller. Fine day after the blow last night. Then, his voice dropping to a confidential, almost reverent tone, he added, Sad news, though. Old Mrs. Periwinkle from down the lane passed peacefully in her sleep. A long life, well lived. The sea calls us all home eventually, eh? I stared at him. The image of a small, stooped figure, eerily resembling the town's oldest inhabitant, walking silently into the black waves under the midnight moon, searing itself into my mind. Peaceful in her sleep? Right. The dreams were the worst. Or perhaps they were just an extension of Ashfern Bay's waking nightmare. Sylvie was always there, a constant, sorrowful presence in the turbulent landscapes of my sleep. Sometimes she was waterlogged, her once vibrant auburn hair lank and matted with dark, stringy kelp, her eyes wide and accusing as she pleaded with me from a dark, sunless abyss. Why didn't you save me, Graham? Why did you let me go? Other times she was angry, her voice distorted, echoing as if from a great depth, her words swallowed by the sound of rushing water, her accusations lost just before they became clear. The smell of rotting seaweed and cold, stagnant brine permeated these dreams, a cloying, visceral scent that often lingered in the musty air of the breach house long after I awoke, gasping, in a tangle of sweat-soaked sheets. The house itself seemed to be colluding with my nightmares. I started hearing things, subtle at first, then more insistent. The soft, wet sound of breathing, rhythmic and slow, emanating from the corroded brass sink drains in the kitchen and bathroom. Especially late at night when the wind died down, faint whispers too indistinct to be words, but with a cadence that chillingly mimicked Sylvie's voice, seemed to sigh from the drafts that snaked through the house's ancient, decaying frame. My hand, more often than not, found its way to the bottle of cheap whiskey Clem Harker had so thoughtfully provided. It didn't stop the sounds, but it blurred their edges, made them almost bearable. Eleanor Rake became my reluctant, cryptic oracle. I'd find her at the base of the lighthouse, staring out at the gray, heaving sea, her scarred throat exposed to the biting wind. She spoke in riddles, in fragments, her pale eyes never quite meeting mine. She told me of the Marrowlight, a name spoken in a hushed, fearful whisper. An ancient consciousness, she said, that dwelled in the lightless, unexplored trenches far offshore. Ashfern Bay, she explained, had a pact with it, an agreement forged in blood and salt water centuries ago by the town's founding families. It trades, Mr. Teller, she'd murmured, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Life for life, the rules. They keep the balance, or they guide the offering. Someone always pays the toll. Clem Harker, in contrast to Eleanor's grim pronouncements, continued his rounds of folksy helpfulness. He stopped by the breach house with a basket of freshly caught mackerel. Thought you might appreciate a taste of the ocean's bounty, son. Or an armful of seasoned driftwood from my perpetually damp fireplace. He'd offer me old, brittle maritime charts of Ashfern Bay, meticulously hand-drawn. The treacherous deep trenches offshore marked with unsettlingly bold ink. Know your waters, Mr. Teller. He'd say with a wink. She's a fickle mistress, the sea. Once, he gifted me a pair of antique, patched-up canvas waders he'd found in the Historical Society's archives. Might come in handy if you plan on exploring the flats at low tide, he'd said, his smile benign, but his eyes holding that familiar, unreadable gleam. His advice about the tides, the currents, the old ways of Ashfern, always seemed to carry a subtle, unsettling undertone. A gentle nudge towards the very dangers the rules warned against. One particularly bleak afternoon, driven by a restless, alcohol-fueled curiosity, I decided to explore the damp, labyrinthine cellar of the breach house. The air down there was thick, cold and heavy, with the smell of mildew and something else. Something that reminded me of low tide on a hot day. The scent of exposed, decaying marine life. By the wavering light of an old oil lantern I'd found, my gaze fell upon the rough-hewn stone walls. Etched into the damp, sweating stone, clearly by a child's hand, were a series of crude, chilling drawings. Figures, stick-like and small, walking resolutely into a tumultuous, wave-filled sea. A skeletal lighthouse, its beam a stark, angry red. And, most disturbingly, a massive, vaguely tentacled shape, covered in what looked like myriad staring eyes, rising from an unnaturally receding shoreline. One of the drawings, more detailed than the others, depicted a small figure being offered to this monstrous shape by larger, robed figures. Beneath it, scrawled in a shaky, childish script, was a date and a single heartbreaking sentence. Papa gone to Marrowlight. October 17th, 1888. The year of the great hurricane that had decimated this coast. The Marrowlight. It wasn't just a name, Eleanor whispered. It was a hungry, ancient god. My days in Ashfern Bay became a descent into a fog of grief, alcohol, and annoying, obsessive curiosity. The sea, once a backdrop to my sorrow, now felt like an active, malevolent presence, its moods dictating the rhythm of the town. and increasingly, my own fractured psyche. I found myself drawn to the town's tiny, dust-choked archive, housed in a back room of Clem Harker's funeral parlor, a place that smelled overwhelmingly of formaldehyde and old paper. Harker, ever the helpful curator, provided me with access to brittle, leather-bound ledgers and faded town meeting minutes. The records were sparse, often cryptic, but a pattern began to emerge. Oblique references to the deep toll, to sacrifices made to appease the old ones of the trench, to families who had given sons and daughters to the Grey Widowmaker. These entries, spanning centuries, always coincided with periods of unusual prosperity for the town. Bountiful fishing seasons, miraculously averted storms. Then came the shift. It wasn't a storm, not in the conventional sense. The sky, which had been a sullen, bruised gray for days, took on an unnatural yellowish tinge. The wind died completely, leaving the air heavy, still pregnant with an unseen, oppressive pressure. The gulls, usually a constant, raucous presence, fell utterly silent. A profound, unnerving stillness settled over Ashfern Bay, a silence that felt far more threatening than any gale. Eleanor Rake appeared at the door of the breach house, her usual guarded composure shattered. Her face was pale, almost translucent beneath her weather-beaten tan, her pale blue eyes wide, with a primal fear that chilled me more than any icy blast of wind from the Atlantic. She didn't knock, just burst in, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "The tide, Mr. Teller," she choked out, her voice no longer a whisper, but a harsh, strained rasp. "It's turning wrong. Too fast. Too far." I followed her out onto the bluff, overlooking the beach. The sight that greeted me defied all logic, all experience. The tide, which should have been nearing its peak, was receding with astonishing, unnatural speed. It wasn't just ebbing. It was being sucked away from the shore, as if by some colossal, unseen siphon. The water pulled back and back and back, far beyond any normal low tide mark I had ever witnessed, exposing a vast, glistening, alien expanse of seabed. Rocks covered in slime, tangled forests of dark, unknown kelp, and most ominously, deep, black, shadowed trenches snaking out towards the abyssal depths, trenches that should have been hundreds of feet beneath the waves. The exposed seabed steamed with a faint, sickly greenish phosphorescent mist, and a low guttural grinding sound, like immense stones being dragged across the ocean floor, began to emanate from the largest, deepest of the trenches. The air filled with an overpowering stench, ancient, concentrated brine, sulfurous decay, and something else, something indescribably old and coldly, terribly predatory. Rule 3. If the tide recedes more than half a mile, don't marvel at the exposed seabed. Run inland immediately, and don't look back at what emerges from the deep trenches. It comes to collect. Run! Eleanor shrieked, her voice cracking with terror. She grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong, her long-gloved fingers digging into my flesh. "Inland! Now! Don't look back! For God's sake, don't look back! It's coming to collect!" The few other townsfolk visible from our vantage point, fishermen on the pier, a woman tending a small windswept garden, were already fleeing, a silent, terrified exodus towards the meager shelter of the village and the dark pines beyond. There was no panic, no screaming, just a grim, practiced haste that spoke of a horror intimately known, a ritual of survival deeply ingrained. As I stumbled inland with Eleanor, her terror, a contagious current, a horrifying, powerful psychic image slammed into my mind, as vivid and unsolicited as a blow. A vast, shadowy form, uncoiling from the largest, blackest trench, its silhouette vaguely, monstrously cephalopodic, but impossibly large. Its bulk blotting out the horizon. I saw, or sensed, myriad pale, lidless, searching eyes, each the size of a small boat, turning towards the shore. And then, Sylvie's voice, clear as a bell, as if she were standing right beside me. Her tone soft, seductive, chillingly serene, whispered in my ear. "It's so beautiful down here, Graham. So peaceful. Come see, come join me." My feet faltered. The urge to turn, to look, to answer that beloved, beckoning voice was almost overwhelming. The old stone lighthouse, usually a symbol of guidance, became our desperate, fragile sanctuary. Eleanor, her breath still ragged, slammed the heavy iron door shut behind us, the sound echoing in the cramped circular space. The air inside was thick with the smell of lamp oil, salt, and an old ingrained fear. Through the narrow, salt-caked windows, we could only glimpse fragments of the unfolding horror on the unnaturally exposed seabed. But the sounds and the sheer psychic pressure were inescapable. The grinding, guttural groans from the deep trenches intensified, vibrating through the very stone of the tower. The phosphorescent mist thickened, casting an eerie, spectral glow over the alien landscape. We didn't need to see. We could feel the immense, ancient intelligence out there, scanning the shore, its cold, predatory attention palpable. The lighthouse itself seemed to react, its ancient structure groaning as if under immense pressure. Its beam, which should have been dormant in the daylight, flickering erratically, sometimes terrifyingly, pulsing that deep, visceral blood red. The Marrowlight, it seemed, had found its focus. Me. The psychic assault began subtly, then escalated with horrifying intensity. Visions of Sylvie, more vivid, more real than any dream, filled my mind. She was there, standing on the glistening, alien seabed, beckoning to me. Her form sometimes translucent, sometimes heartbreakingly solid. She pleaded with me, her voice a perfect echo of the Sylvie I'd loved, full of sorrow and longing. "It's not so bad here, Graham." The quiet. "It's a kind of peace. Your grief, your pain. You can let it all go. Just join me. Join us in the deep." Then the visions turned darker, sharper. The Marrowlight dredged up my most buried memories, the ones I'd drowned in alcohol and denial. The argument on the Montauk Cliffs, replayed with brutal, unforgiving clarity. My angry words, Sylvie's tear-streaked face, the way she'd stumbled near the crumbling edge, the slip, her scream, cut short by the roar of the wind and the waves. My own momentary, unforgivable hesitation before I'd scrambled down. Too late. The question voiced by Sylvie's spectral lips, by the Marrowlight's insidious whisper, echoed in the confines of my skull. A relentless hammering accusation. "Did you push her, Graham? Did you let her fall?" Just as I felt my sanity fraying, the heavy iron door of the lighthouse creaked open. Clem Harker. He offered a weak, folksy smile, though his eyes were wide and held a strange, feverish light. "Thought you folks might need some company," he said, his voice too calm, too reasonable for the unfolding apocalypse outside. "Nasty business, this. Happens every few generations. The deep tide." He moved further into the cramped space, his presence suddenly feeling more oppressive than the entity outside. He began to speak, his tone soft, almost paternal, of the peace the sea offered, how some were chosen by the Marrowlight, how their sacrifice ensured Ashfern's continued existence. "Sometimes, son," he said, placing a hand that felt cold as a fish on my shoulder. "Letting go is the only way to hold on to what truly matters. The town, our families, our way of life. A small price for so many." Eleanor, who had been crouched by a window, her face a mask of terror, suddenly straightened. A desperate, furious clarity burned in her glassy eyes. "He's lying, Mr. Teller," she hissed, her voice raw. "He is not seeking refuge. He's the shepherd of the compact. Now, Eleanor, that's no way to talk, Clem said, his smile tightening. But his eyes darted towards her, sharp and cold. For generations, his family has ensured the balance, Eleanor cried, stumbling towards me. They guide the offerings. He chooses them. Newcomers, the weak, the broken. Like you, Mr. Teller. He brought you here. The house that cousin you never knew. It was all him. He prepares them for the Marrowlight. Clem's folksy mask dissolved, his face hardened, his eyes becoming flat, reptilian. The town must survive Teller. The pact must be honored. Someone always has to pay the toll. And this time, it's you. The Marrowlight has taken a particular interest. As if on cue, the psychic pressure intensified. Sylvie's apparition materialized before me, no longer distant, but standing just beyond the lighthouse door, on the edge of the returning tide, which was now surging back with terrifying speed. She was beautiful, serene, whole again, her hand outstretched, shoes Graham, her voice, or the Marrowlight's perfect mimicry of it, whispered, full of a profound, seductive peace. The shore, and your endless pain, or the solace of the deep, an end to it all. With me, the offer was almost irresistible. The thought of oblivion, of an end to the grief, the guilt. No, Eleanor screamed. Clem moved then, surprisingly fast for his age. He grabbed my arm, his grip like iron, trying to drag me towards the door, towards Sylvie's beckoning ghost. It's for the good of Ashfern, Teller. She's waiting for you. Accept the bargain. The lighthouse beam above us pulsed, a searing, blinding crimson, bathing the interior in a hellish light. The grinding from the deep rose to a deafening crescendo. I was caught between Clem's desperate strength, Sylvie's irresistible plea, and Eleanor's terrified shouts. My mind, my will, was a battlefield. The crimson light of the lighthouse seared my eyes. The psychic screams of the Marrowlight and Sylvie's spectral pleas, a vortex in my head. Clem Harker's grip was a vice, his face a mask of fanatical determination. She wants you, tell her. It's an honor, a necessary end. But Eleanor's desperate cry, he's lying, had pierced through the hallucinatory fog. The truth of Harker's monstrous stewardship, his cold-blooded shepherding of souls to this ancient abyssal god, ignited a spark of defiance in the ruins of my will. This wasn't peace Sylvie offered. It was consumption. This wasn't solace. It was an eternal, cold damnation. Sylvie wouldn't want this. I roared, the words tearing from my throat, raw with a grief that was suddenly horribly clear, and the memory of Montauk no longer a hazy, alcohol-soaked blur, but a sharp, stabbing image. Her stumble, yes, but also my own frozen inaction. My momentary paralysis born of anger and shock. I hadn't pushed her, but I hadn't saved her either, and that truth, agonizing as it was mine, not the Marrowlight's to twist. With a surge of adrenaline born of desperation, I twisted out of Harker's grasp. He lunged again, but I grabbed one of the heavy iron pry bars used for the lighthouse mechanism, a forgotten relic leaning against the wall. I didn't swing to strike, but to fend him off, to create space. The pact isn't with me, I yelled, more to the oppressive presence of the Marrowlight than to Harker. This ends. Perhaps it was the force of my refusal, the raw emotional energy of my acknowledged guilt. Or perhaps Eleanor, seeing her chance, did something. A lever pulled, a switch thrown in the lighthouse, ancient mechanism. The crimson beam outside faltered, sputtered, then died, plunging the lantern room into a disorienting, stormy twilight. The effect was instantaneous. Sylvie's apparition flickered, a serene expression contorting into a silent, lipless snarl of inhuman rage, before dissolving like sea foam. The psychic pressure lessened, the whispers receding. The Marrowlight, its direct line of influence, its primary lure, momentarily severed. Clem Harker, however, was beyond reason. He howled, a sound of pure, thwarted fury, and charged again. This time Eleanor was there, small but fierce, intercepting him. They grappled, a desperate, clumsy struggle. Outside, the tide, which had been surging back, seemed to hesitate. Then, with a sound like the world cracking open, a colossal wave, impossibly tall, blacker than the stormiest night, rose from the deep. It wasn't a natural wave. It was a manifestation of the Marrowlight's thwarted hunger, its immense, ancient displeasure. It crashed against the base of the lighthouse with the force of a detonating bomb. The stone tower screamed, shuddered, and tilted precariously. Water exploded through the narrow windows, drenching us in icy, stinking brine. Harker, thrown off balance, stumbled towards the open doorway. He scrabbled for purchase, his eyes wide with a sudden dawning terror as he looked out at the churning, monstrous sea. "No, not me," he whimpered. A section of the walkway outside the door collapsed into the abyss. Harker screamed, a thin, reedy sound, as he lost his footing. For a moment, he clung to the jagged edge, his fingers bloody. Then, with a final, despairing cry, he was gone, swallowed by the black, roiling water. The shepherd had become the offering. The Marrowlight, its immediate prize denied, its chosen shepherd claimed, seemed to withdraw its most intense focus. The grinding sounds from the deep lessened. The unnatural pressure in the air eased, though the sea outside remained a chaotic, churning maelstrom. Battered, soaked, and trembling, Eleanor and I clung to the shuddering structure of the lighthouse. The immediate threat had passed, but the price of refusal was clear. The balance was broken. The Marrowlight would be back, and it would be hungrier. Ashfern Bay was now truly, terrifyingly alone with its ancient abyssal god. My own guilt, raw and exposed, felt like an open wound, a beacon that would surely draw its attention again. The days that followed were steeped in a stunned, fearful silence. Ashfern Bay, or what was left of its spirit, seemed to hold its breath. The sea, though calmer now, felt different, watchful, brooding, its surface concealing an unslaked ancient hunger. The townsfolk, those who remained, moved like ghosts, their faces etched with a new, deeper weariness. Clem Harker's disappearance was noted with hushed whispers, his neatly kept funeral parlor standing empty, a grim monument to a broken pact. The old rituals, the furtive glances towards the sea, the carefully observed superstitions, now felt hollow, inadequate. Eleanor Rake and I were pariahs of a sort, survivors of a cataclysm that had exposed the town's rotten core. She retreated further into the stoic silence of her lighthouse vigil, her pale eyes forever scanning the horizon. The scars on her throat a stark testament to the price of living on the edge of the abyss. I knew I couldn't stay. The breach house, with its whispering floorboards and Sylvie's lingering sorrow, was no longer a potential refuge, but a constant, agonizing reminder of my failures, past and present. And I knew with a chilling certainty that the Marrowlight hadn't forgotten me. My refusal, my raw, acknowledged guilt, it had marked me, made me a beacon of a different kind. But I couldn't simply leave Ashfern Bay to its fate either. My ordeal had forged a reluctant, horrified connection to this cursed place. I couldn't save them. Not truly. The Marrowlight was too vast, too ancient. But perhaps I could offer a warning, a different kind of guidance. Before I left, I took the old water-stained paper with the 3 rules. The one Eleanor had slipped under my door. I added a 4th, my own hand shaking as I wrote. If a man named Graham Teller ever returns to Ashfern Bay, know that the Marrowlight has sent him. He is no longer a refuge seeker. He is its herald, or its unwilling bait. Do not trust him. The sea has already claimed too much of his soul. I left the note where I had found it, under the door of the breach house, for whoever might be foolish or desperate enough to inherit its sorrow next. My escape from Ashfern Bay was as unceremonious as my arrival, though this time the few remaining fishermen on the pier watched me with something other than stony indifference. It might have been fear, or perhaps a dawning desperate hope that my departure would appease the angered depths. I tried to resume a life, the life I had fled. But the city felt alien, its noises jarring, its concerns trivial. The sea haunted me, even miles inland. I'd wake in the night, drenched in sweat, the smell of brine and rotting kelp thick in my nostrils, Sylvie's sorrowful, accusatory whisper echoing in my ears. The guilt over her death was a constant companion, no longer deniable, but a cold, hard knot in my soul. Months later, I found myself in a different coastal city, hundreds of miles south of Maine. I'd been drawn there, I told myself, by a job offer, a chance to start over. But I knew, deep down, I was still tethered to the ocean, to the fear, to the memory of the Marrowlight. One evening, walking along a crowded boardwalk, the cheerful sounds of families and amusement park rides grating on my nerves, I saw it. A small handwritten notice tacked to a weathered piling, almost hidden from view. The paper was old, salt-stained, the handwriting spidery and familiar. It listed 3 rules. They were different from Ashfern's, specific to this new coastline, this new stretch of hungry water. But the intent, the chilling implication was the same. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just Ashfern. It was everywhere. The compacts were everywhere. The deep trenches, the ancient things that slept within them. Their hunger was eternal, their reach far wider than one forgotten Maine village. I looked out at the darkening ocean, the waves crashing rhythmically against the shore. A lighthouse beam, miles out, swept across the water. For a horrifying, heart-stopping instant, it flashed a deep, familiar blood red. The tide was always turning, and the watch, it seemed, was now mine. I was no longer just a survivor. I was a reluctant prophet, a Cassandra of the coming Abyssal age, forever marked, forever listening for the whispers from the deep. Ashfern Bay holds its secrets tight, guarded by rules, etched in salt and blood. Graham Teller learned that some deaths are not an ending but a beginning. The rules were a desperate shield against a horror waiting in the deep. The Marrowlight is contained, for now. Seriously, if you didn't stay until the very end, you missed the ultimate revelation, the twist that reveals the true, terrifying scope of Ashfern Bay's reach. The last few moments change everything. What do you think the Marrowlight is? What was Clem Harker's true role? Share your theories in the comments below. And if you made it through the long fog, if Ashfern Bay hasn't claimed you, then you're already a part of our story. Subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules, because some places, they never truly let you go. And the tide, it always returns.